Okay, so right now, before I get into more details about how the ball bounce works. Okay, for some reason, the handler appears on my screen, but it's barely visible on the TV screen. So right now, I have a ball bounce, and I made a couple changes as opposed to what I did last week. So last week, what I have done is okay, so you have the ball, you have the mesh, and then you have several, let's say, transform groups I have created above the mesh object. So I've created a group in order to keyframe the rotation of the ball, and then there's a group that I created to do the translation of the ball. What I have done slightly differently as opposed to last week was originally I have applied the squash handler directly to the ball, but I've changed it so I applied the squash handler to the rotation of the ball instead, because what this will do is I can rotate the ball first, and then if I apply the squash handler, as you can see, it will compress the ball even when the ball is rotated. And this is handy because if you've done it the other way before, where if you apply the squash handler first and then the ball rotation, you'll end up having a pancake that's just flopping around. Yeah, or if you haven't set it the previous way, you could rotate the ball away so it lands exactly flat side on the ground, which also works too. Or you can do that. There are many approaches. Yes.
You say rotate so it's back to squash?
Yeah, that's what I would recommend. So you can rotate the ball first, and then the squash handles independently of the ball's rotation. As you can see right here, where I can rotate the ball and yet still be affected by. Yeah, you can see how I can rotate the ball, but it still keeps the squash shape. And another item that I find that might be handy is when creating the squash deformer. I'll go through this one more time because there has been one additional step into creating the squash deformer that might come in handy. When creating the squash deformer, so I'm going to do it once more. Rigging, deform, nonlinear deformer, go to squash. One other thing I also found very handy is right now if you apply the squash handle by default, so by default what happens is if you apply the handler, it compresses from the middle. What you could do to help out your process is you can take the squash handler, move it. Okay, I'm using the V key to snap. Move the handler to the bottom of the ball, and then change the lower bound. So the lower bound is 0, and the higher bound is wherever the top of the ball is. And as a result, when I apply the squash handler, it will compress from the bottom of the ball instead through the center. So it's easier to control the ball compressing on the hard surface like the floor in that case. Okay, are we all good with the updates? Nice. Okay, so now let's open up the room scene. Okay, so right now I'm going to turn down the graphical settings at the moment because my computer's not the best at handling this, so I'll just leave it like this for now. So right now I have referenced the ballness in a very basic 2D scene with a window. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how to make the ball bounce, essentially. So right now, in order to move the ball, remember how I have, okay, so right now, if you go to the ball, you'll notice how there's this cube icon. If you see this little blue cube thing in the outliner, that means you have referenced the object and has done so properly. So in order to move the ball around, you want to use the translate and okay, so first thing we want to do is we want to keyframe the ball's relative position throughout the entire animation. So I'm going to take the translate in order to animate. So right now, first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that the playback speed for your animation is actually shown in real time and not as fast as your computer can chug it at you. Because right now, okay, so what you need to do is when you need to go and click on this icon with the running person in the gear icon. You click on it, and then you'll notice that there's a playback speed. Change the playback speed to right by default. It'll be play every frame. If you haven't changed it already, go to 24 FPS times 1. That will make it so when you preview the playback, it will actually play in 24 frames a second, not as fast as your computer can play back at you. So that's just to ensure that we have a smooth playback speed overall. Okay, now what I'm going to do is right off the top, I'm going to use primarily, I'm going to go and create a new orthographic camera like actually the front should suffice. The ball, and then assume that, and then yeah, the floor is a plane at 0, 0, 0. So for now, this thick line is going to be the floor. So the first step I'm going to do is I'm going to keyframe the ball's translation movement. So in order to do so, I am going to click on the translate group in particular. I am going to then move the ball to where it probably will start in scene. I'm going to move it outside, let's say, let's scale the ball down slightly a bit more. Scale it a bit down. Okay, so I'm going to keyframe it somewhere around, okay, let's just say the ball will bounce for around 5 seconds. So I'm going to keyframe the ball in the beginning of the scene at frame 1, and then later on around, let's say frame 120, I'm going to keyframe the ball right here. And the fastest way to keyframe is just the shortcut is the S key for keyframe, but you could also manually, let's say if you want to keyframe just the Y rotation, for example, you could go to the manual XYZ rotation right here and just go to key selected, and that'll allow you to keyframe one attribute manually. Okay, so right now you'll see, okay, the ball moves in and slow out, but as we think about it, when the ball bounces in a direction, when the ball bounces in a single direction forward, you can imagine that the X component actually does not have a slow and slow out. It's actually more of a consistent velocity that the ball is traveling in a horizontal direction. So right now, what we have in we had the ball doing a slow and slow. You can see the ball slowing in to accelerate and then deaccelerate at the end. That is not what we want. Yes. What was it?
How does it actually figure it out?
You mean how the ball slows and slows out by default?
Yeah.
That's actually the default interpolation that. Yeah, the default interpolation should be that if you make 2 keyframes, Maya will tend to do a slow and slow out between the 2 keyframes, and we want to actually change it so that the X translation is actually linear. So in order to do that, okay, so right now, this is probably going to be your new best friend from now and this point on. You want to familiarize yourself with the graph editor by going to Windows, Animation Editor, Graph Editor. So right now, you're going to be using this graph editor a lot for the rest of the semester. Okay, so right now, if we take a look at the translation X, you can see, if we take a look at the X translation of the ball, you notice how, yeah, it looks like you can see how the ball gradually picks up velocity and then slows down at the end. The quickest way to change it is click and drag the 2 keyframe points. Right now, you'll see how there's a bunch of icons at the top that shows a bunch of rectangular keyframe nodes. What we're concerned about is there is one that changes it, because right now, but by default, you'll have the one that's highlighted with an A, which means it'll make an automatic smooth interpolation between the 2 points. And what you want to do is there's just one with a straight line, and that changes. You can see how now the graph is now a linear interpolation between the first and the last point. And now if we were to play back the animation, the ball is consistently translating along the scene. I'm thinking 120 frames might be a little too slow, so let's slower it down to around 96. Yeah, it's still a little slow, but it'll do for now. Actually, let's drag it down to yes. And yeah, if you want to move the keyframes, you can either copy and paste the keyframes, or alternately, you could also use to translate on the keyframe node. So I could, let's say, move the keyframe right here, and you can see how I've shifted the keyframe to like frame 29. It broke linear interpolation. Okay, good. So now that we have the ball translate, now let's start to place the ball on, the ball needs to bounce up and down. So let's start to think about how the ball will actually, travel vertically. So what I'm going to do right now is, okay, so the ball is going to need to fly in through the window. So I am going to, let's say, drop the ball somewhere like, let's give it like a distance. Let's give it like an 8.5. Let's start somewhere around that. And then I'm going to, okay, if I want to keyframe just the Y translation manually, I can just right click on the Y attribute and go with key selected. Okay, so right now, ball hovers in. I'm going to make the ball land on the floor around frame 36. So I'm going to move translation to, it's not 0, but more like a 0.6. That's where the ball approximately touches the floor. 36, 72. Let's give it like an 8. So, let's actually move this back to frame 24. Frame 24 is a bit. Let's do 32. Move the bounce to 64. Okay, so high 64, and then the ball will land again at 96. Okay, so right now the ball is moving in an arc motion, but as you notice, once again, the interpolation does not look quite correct to the ball bounce. It looks like the ball is like, you can see how the ball is accelerating when it's flying from its peak height towards the floor, but when the ball is approaching near the floor, you notice how the ball magically deaccelerates as it's getting closer towards the ground, which kind of defies the laws of physics at the moment. I mean, think about it. When you drop a physical ball on the ground, the ball actually picks up velocity until it impacts the ground, and then the ball will bounce off the ball the same velocity as the ball impacts the ground. So we want the ball to continue picking up speed until it hits the ground, and once the ball hits the ground, we want the ball to bounce upwards in the same with the same speed as the ball impacts the ground. So in order to do that, we need to go back to our graph editor. Okay, so if there's any extra keyframes, like right now I want just a linear interpolation between the start and the end. Right now we're going to take a look at the Y translation of the ball. As you can see right now, this is precisely our issue. The ball goes from, it starts from the peak, it deaccelerates until it hits the ground, and then as you can see, this smoothness is precisely why the ball looks like it's deaccelerating as it hits the ground. So what we're going to need to do is we are going to need to actually modify the angle, modify the incoming velocity so that the ball does not lose speed as it impacts the ground. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight all the keyframes. And what I'm going to do is I want to manipulate each of the incoming angles manually. So in order to do that, I'll go to tangents and then break tangent. What break tangents allow me to do is now, if I were to highlight a keyframe in particular, you'll see these handlers. You'll see these handles. I can access the handles separately, and then I could change the handle in a way so that now if I drag it, you can see that now the ball. Now you can see that it's actually the ball's the curve slopes downwards rather than sloping out towards the bottom of the floor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the tangent so that the ball, so that the ball impacts the ground at full velocity and it bounces back up at approximately the same angle that the ball is coming inwards. And then I will do the same with this graph as well. So now, if I were to take a look at the ball bounce now, this is like, okay, it looks good besides the fact that the gravity looks like the ball is floating on the moon or something. So the best way to fix that issue is actually, let's take all the keyframes, and if you still think the ball looks like it's gravitating, it looks like it's a bit too floaty, that means your ball is, well, what did I... That means the ball needs to, actually travel more quickly. So what I'm going to do is let's scale these frames down to around 72 for now. There's also a way that you can snap the keyframes. Okay, I'm just going to leave this for now. Okay, it's slightly better. Okay, so then as for the ball rotation, the ball will just consistently, when the ball is bouncing in a horizontal direction, the ball will have a bit of rotation, and even if the ball lands, the rotation of the ball does not stop unless your ball is possessed and can move on its own. So the easiest way to do the ball rotation is go back to how we mentioned in the outliner, how the ball rotation is in a separate group. What I'm going to do is at frame, okay, the animation now goes from, I changed it so it goes to frame around, I'll just go to frame 57-ish. The ball rotation, so right now I'm going to keyframe the ball to be right now what we're concerned about is, I believe it's going to be, it's not the rotation, it's going to be the Z rotation from this perspective. So at 1, I'm going to keyframe the Z rotation as 0, so I'm going to key the Z rotation as 0, and then at frame 57-ish, I'm going to give this a number like, so each rotation is 300 degrees. I'll just give it like 1,000. Okay, the ball is actually back spinning, so negative 1,000 degrees. Okay. All right. Yeah. This is more like it. This is looking more like it. We have the ball rotation. We have the ball bounce. That's looking more proper. The last item that we need at this point is this actual stretch and squash of the ball, because unless the ball is made out of extremely hard steel, there's going to be a bit of compression when the ball impacts the ground. Okay, and in order to do so, in order to access the squash handler once more, you go to your ball squash handler, and then you go to attribute editor, and then you go to squash. And then you notice how there is this factor attribute that we can modify. What we need to do is we need to find, okay, so right now, if you want to keyframe the ball squash, you go to the factor and then you go to set key. That'll allow you to keyframe the ball squash in particular. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right now the ball does not compress until Okay, we don't need these keyframes, so I'll delete these. We just need the translation ones. I'm just want to make sure that the keyframes are actually on a whole number. Whoa, what did I do? Okay, anyways, I'm going to highlight the keyframe. I'm going to drag it so it's on a whole number. Just to make, I'm just adjusting so that keyframes are actually in a whole number, so it's just easier to work with. The ball's always visible anyways. Okay, so right now I got whole numbers to work with. Okay, so frame 19, that's where the ball impacts the ground. What I am going to do is I am going to go to the squash handler. I am going to compress the ball. So let's say negative 0.4 for the factor. That looks about good. Okay, and if you go to the graph editor, you can also see the interpolation for the ball squash as well. So I'm going to, but right now, let's say that if we start the ball, if the ball is uncompressed from the peak and we leave the ball to compress itself by the time it reaches the floor, you notice how the ball starts to flatten itself before it even reaches the ground, which does not look very right. So the best way to do that is you stop until, let's say, around a couple frames before a ball impacts, and then we will add another 0 keyframe, so the ball does not compress until the ball does not look like it's compressing until right before it's about to impact the ground. So I'd say about 3 frames before, and then I will change it to be, let's say, about 3 frames after as well. And then I'll do the same at frame 53. So now if we take a look at the graph editor, you get a factor, you'll see how the ball will not stop compressing itself until practically about 3 frames before the ball lands. Okay, so now we play back the animation, and you see the ball has a bit more of you can see how the ball looks like has a bit more of an impact when it reaches the ground because we compress the ball a little bit when it lands. And as an extra touch, what you could do is, because this is kind of more like an in-between effect, where if you want the ball to look like if you want to exaggerate the ball stretch and squash even further while the ball is landing, you can also do a bit of a stretch while the ball is bouncing off from the floor. So in order to demonstrate that, what I'll do is I'll say around frame 23, I'd say So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keyframe 0 at frame 26, and at key 23, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to actually change the I'm going to change the squash factor, so it's at, I'm going to change the squash factor so it's like a positive number, let's say about 0.3. Okay, so now you see how, okay, if the graph looks a bit too difficult to work with, quick shortcut to keep in mind, highlight all the keyframes of interest, hit the F key, and it'll actually zoom in all the keyframes more, so it's more easily viewable on screen. Okay, so now that I have added a bit of a ball stretch when the ball is rising, you see how the ball has a bit more of a springiness as the ball is rising from the floor. And that's about it for a ball bounce. And I guess to complete the scene, what I could do real quick is I guess real quick, what I could do is I have a window, and and for those who haven't animated the window yet, this is how you do it. Go to window. So right now you see how the pivot point is right on the center of the window. We want to change the pivot point of the window so it's actually aligned along the hinge of the window instead. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the window group, I'm going to click on edit pivot, and then I'm going to set the alignment to around where the edge of the window is. So now if I were to rotate the window actually can open. So what I'll do is let's open the window. Okay, so at frame 1, the window will, let's say it's a Y rotation because we're rotating outwards, so it should be the Y rotation. Yes. Set the keyframe at frame 1. Go to frame 10ish, and then I'm going to animate the window to open like, let's say -90 degrees. Key selected, and now the window will open and allow the ball to enter in. Okay. That looks about good. And I guess because I'm a bit of a completionist, let's just say at frame 0, I'm going to add one more squash frame. At frame 56, let's add the -0.4 squash, so it actually looks good around there too. Boing, boing, boing. All right, looks about good. So, are we all good with the ball bounce? Do you all have any questions? What was it?
No, I said more solstice.
Okay, that'll get to you after I stop the recording. Then, okay, so then after you know how to animate the ball, well, at this point you can apply the same techniques and apply them to the box as well. So that's about it. I'm gonna stop recording right here.